you guys so much for taking the time to talk to us.
Yeah,
Thanks
happy
for
to be
having
here.
us.
First question, what was your introduction to punk rock?
Mm. I would say, for me, it kind of started with skateboarding. So, you know, getting a group of guys together, some of my friends, we would skate around different areas of our neighborhood, and it was always a foregone conclusion that someone would have, a stereo, and if we were gonna skate together, we would put tunes on, and it was 9 times out of 10, it was you know Adolescents, Agent Orange, a lot of the skate punk of the 90s. And that's just what we did. So I think that for a lot of ways, it became the soundtrack of what my own adolescence was. And then of course it was like, well, how do they make that sound? How are they playing it? And I got interested in just sort of the mechanics of what a band does, and it got me involved in music and like actually playing music, and so that to me it all kind of became this cycle of this is what life is. It was like skating, punk rock, playing music, and it became kind of a just a way of life, I think. And growing up in Orange County myself, it was just a part of the culture, and I'm sure like where Dan grew up too is just something similar, but just on a different coast.
Yeah, I mean, do we consider Nirvana punk still or no?
I like to think so, right? I feel like grunge is still part of that family, like a brother sister genre. Do
Well,
you guys?
then that was my entry point when
Oh, yeah.
I was 11 years old. I heard Nirvana for the first time, and that was it. I was hooked, sold, hook, line, and sinker in. And then in terms of Orange County, uh, the first time I'd ever seen anyone with more than one tattoo in my life was watching the Story of My Life video on MTV for the first time, and I just was mesmerized and perplexed and fascinated and thought it was so cool and dangerous to see Mike with all those tats. And then coming back from summer camp in 1994, all my friends are into this new band called The Offspring that I had to catch up with, and that was on the heels of before going to camp where everyone was into Green Day. So, which ages me quite a bit, but that was my entry point, was pretty much those moments of knowing what punk was. And since then kind of dove in and dug in and found, I found that world, and it's been a part of my life ever since.
You guys are both journalists.
Editors, writers.
What made you guys decide to write this book? I mean, it's so good for anyone that knows about punk rock or is getting introduced, a must read.
Well, there's a story behind the story. The story behind the story is that Nate and I wrote for OC Weekly for Nate for Jesus, like six years, 7 years probably.
Wow, yeah.
And it was one of my favorite places to write, and I had the freedom creatively to kind of go see things, and Nate would give me assignments that would take me to places and within the scene that I'd never been before, just as, not as a local. And that's how we met and kind of, you know, got this thing going. But I want to say about the summer of 2019, Nate had just left the weekly, and we were working together at a different outlet, and just came to us. It just popped in to our heads. Why not do this? And then the next question I think Nate asked was, has anyone done this before? And I gave the basically a shrug emoji, beats me. And we next day we got to our desks and we're like, no, no one's done this. And one of the guys who would have done it, Mike Bohm, had died not too long before, and he would have been the best person, I still think, to this day, to have done this, because he was the guy at the Times who knew everything. You look him up on Times, his website, all the archives. It's unbelievable how much these guys trusted him. But we saw the chance as kind of the next generation of being there, being around it, and knowing the guys and women in the scene, that we should give this a shot. So in between shifts at our old job, in between edit shifts, we would work on this proposal. And
Back in
how,
2019.
Mm-hmm.
So before the pandemic, we were writing this up, and we got some interviews, some key interviews early with Mike Ness and Dexter and Noodles from the Offspring and Bud Goff from Sublime, and it kind of gave us the confidence to say, hey, we have a lot of great material here to be able to potentially go out and try to, sell a publisher on this thing after obviously we had a huge list of people we needed to talk to, but that was at least a starting point, I think, that would get people interested. And then the pandemic happened, and we were like, well, I don't think anyone's gonna be buying a book right now. So we were kind of more concerned about civilization as we know it. So we kind of put it on the shelf. And when things kind of changed for us, Dan got a new gig, as did I shortly after. And he landed at Spin, and I was at LA Times, and we came back together and said, well, why don't we dust this thing off and see what we can do? And so we went about actually contacting, Dan found an agent that really understood what we were doing, and had been in the punk scene and been in bands and stuff himself, and connect us to our publisher, with Hachette, who was really interested in the idea. And I think that's really what it took, was just people that understood the scene and the relevance of the music and sort of the culture and where we were coming from with it. We got some no's early on, and
Mm-hmm.
it's not that it wasn't a great story. People were like, unsure about really how to tell this thing. And we kind of always knew what the secret of it was, which was to really spend time with these bands, and not just them, but like people behind the scenes who owned the venues, who ran record labels, people who were instrumental in managing some of the bands. And so through all that, you get this multi-layered sort of perspective of really what it was to be a punk band in Orange County in those early days, and then to kind of follow that commercial sort of evolution, going from just kind of like a backyard party scene to something that became sort of a phenomenon in like the 80s with the advent of skateboarding and culture, into the 90s, and then that huge boom obviously we were talking about with Offspring, and No Doubt and Sublime later on. It just kind of, but it was like all of these different points throughout history that sort of add up to this really amazing scene.
The way that you guys wrote it, it's really a love letter to the punk rock scene. For people that are in the punk rock community, you know so much about it, but there's so much that goes on. Even the birth of like slam dancing, to think of like whether or not that was really part of it, but word of mouth, that makes sense that that was like the first ever part of slam dancing. What made you decide, instead of calling it like SoCal or California, decided that it should be specific to Orange County?
Familiarity. We've known the people in the scene for years through writing for the weekly. They knew Nate really well, and there's been so many books about LA written, so many books that what's another one, and plus the John Doe books that were with Tom DeSavia that were so good, which I don't know if the audience is familiar with them, but they're basically compilation of individual essays written by people within the scene, and they're so good. So no one needed another telling of what's been, bashed over the head 1,000 times. This was a new way in. It was a scene we were familiar with, but we became very familiar with as the years went on, and it was new, it was fresh, and it's largely misunderstood. And we sought out to find what the scene, what the people who lived it, especially when before we were born, what it was like, and to dispel any misconceptions. Because if you ask people about Orange County punk, you're going to hear a wide range of different tales about what they think it is versus what the reality is.
Yeah, I'd say that's pretty true. And I think even though it is kind of seems like we're hyper focusing on one place, it's because even that focus has so much history to it. And I think what you'll find is, reading it, each one of those chapters could be its own book. And there's so much history there, and our goal was to try to talk about the place, the music, and the culture all in one. And so for us to do that, we had to kind of hone in on an area specifically that, really kind of birthed the stuff that, again, when we were talking about culturally, yes, but also commercially, um, there's just this trend pattern that exists within that group of municipalities known as Orange County. Um, and we had to kind of go one by one through a lot of the cities that played an instrumental role in this thing. And in order for us to even do that, yeah, it was like, you know, I think we had to drill down sort of early on what we were going to talk about and what we were going to kind of maybe mention, or in some cases, like didn't make the book because there's just so much to talk about. And there's such a rich history. I think that our goal with it was to show the ingenuity of the sound amidst all of this, sort of stereotyping of Orange County. I think early on, that people kind of thought of as, whether you're talking about the LA scene, like Dan was mentioning, who it wasn't always welcome. The Orange County people were not welcome really, in the LA scene, to even within their own backyard. It being a very conservative Republican area, and not that some of these bands are Republican and stuff or come from that, but it's also there's a lot that aren't, and I think that part of it is the music in and of itself was made them a target because it was loud, it was kind of threatening to people who maybe lived in Orange County to sort of escape what they felt was the dangers of city life or whatever. And I think that in a lot of ways the aggression in the music sort of like posed, like they thought, like posed a threat to them. So anyone that did it or like participated in the culture was kind of like public enemy number one.
It was brash, and these kids, 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds at the time, they were brash. They wanted a way to express themselves, and it didn't hurt that Fender was in their backyard.
There's one part of the story where at Cuckoo's Nest, and about the city basically having like the dancing license
Mhm.
versus entertainment, and that before then it was just the entertainment license that you needed for dancing. So it's kind of funny that they added that just in a way to basically control them and possibly get rid of the punk rock scene that was starting there. So
Yeah, well, they wanted to shut him down, and so that's how they did it. That's how politics works. It's not always about the riot police showing up at the parking lot. Sometimes it's the legislator writing a new law that says, "Hey, you're out of existence now, and there's nothing you can really do about it unless you want to fight us in court, and like good luck with that because you have no money, you have no access, we have all the power." And I think that even in spite of that, what you saw with the Nest was a community groundswell of support from the people that participated in it, and obviously the owner of the club, Jerry Roach, wanting to not go down without a fight, and he turned into being one of the biggest like proponents of punk, even though he didn't really understand it. And I think that's one of the things that he realized early on is like, I'm not supposed to get it. I'm not supposed to necessarily like this. This is for another generation. This is beyond me. And I think what made it important was that at various points in this book, punk rock was advanced by people who were not necessarily of the scene, but they understood it. And I think that that's where I think a lot of people can get knowledge from this book, whether you're a fan of the music itself or not, because you understand that sometimes everybody needs help in order to, you know, carry on with things. And it's not always the same people you would expect.
how this book kind of makes you feel, not only it's not directly about punk rock and the OC scene, but I was thinking the same thing when it comes to rap and skateboarding. The skate industry was frowned upon. I don't know if you've ever seen the Nike commercials. They're really funny about joggers. Basically, they use joggers to poke fun at skateboarders being harassed by like security and stuff. How do you guys feel the punk scene has changed? Do you feel like it's still kind of the same? Do you feel it's more accepted?
It's definitely not as dangerous as it was back then. Before, when you're at one of these shows and either HB or at the Nest, or you'd worry about getting stabbed or the cops coming and bashing your head in with a billy club. Not like that anymore. It's a lot more commodified. It's more mainstream. It's Live Nationed, if you will. There's some DIY, but it's not really as prevalent. There'll always be scenes, there'll always be backyard parties because bands have to get their start somewhere. But with the it's more of a business thing where it's a consolidation of all the venues now under that umbrella. It's not as like it's something corporate couldn't just pop up like they did at the end of this book by sneaking into play a gig by hiding in the back of a van because they were underage. Like that would never happen anymore.
Mm. I do think the spirit of it exists in a lot of ways still. I mean, you have bands not only doing backyard stuff, but they're doing things like they're kind of using, in a lot of ways, like, yes, the technology that we have today, it kind of makes people less, I don't know, it's weird because in some sense it builds community, but then in some sense it kind of isolates us because we're all on our phones all the time. But I do think that in a certain way, it does show a lens on like what's going on in culture. Like when we were writing the proposal around that time, there was a band that practiced in the same area that my band at the time played in the same warehouse space or whatever, and they went viral doing a pop-up show at Denny's
Hmm.
in Santa Ana, and it was this big mosh scene. It was like crazy. It went everywhere. And these are local. There's a local band doing just crazy spur of the moment thing. I think that those kind of things and people wanting to have sort of that rush of like we're in it together, doing something to kind of like buck the system. That's always going to be there. And I think that's partially why the music still persists, because that feeling amongst definitely people of a certain age group, but even like, I guess older, but less likely when you're in your like 40s and 50s to go start a mosh pit at Denny's. But if you are,
We need to bring our canes out for that.
yeah,
And
yeah,
we
it could
might
get kind of
pull
rough.
a muscle or a disc in our back if that's
It,
the case.
it would get rough on the insurance company, for them to like all these people with bum hips and stuff. But um I think that energy and that spirit is always going to be there. And I think that in that sense, the music will be there. It just might take on different forms. You look at bands like The Garden, who are sort of, what would be more considered like, a newer generation of like Orange County based punk, but at the same time, I mean, doesn't really bear any resemblance to what you can see, like what the Adolescents did or whatever. It's just its own thing. Um, there's a host of bands like that and artists like that who create music with the same feeling, and they just do it their own way. And I think that's the point of punk also, is it's not meant to be some structured like this is how you play it. Like this could be whatever you want. And that was what you also see in the book about the early bands. They were all different and they all had their own unique style. And I think that that's what we should get back to.
It's great too, because in the book, you touch upon the different types of punk. It's not just like one specific sound, but when you think of like Social Distortion versus the Vandals versus Sublime and No Doubt, it's so Agent Orange. Everything sounds so different. Something that brings them all together, and it's almost that, I don't know, it's freedom of expression, I guess I would say, right? You mentioned no's. So how was it getting involved with other bands or other people within the scene that, you've spoke to, like Jerry Roach, Kevin Lyman, Mike Ness has a forward. How did all that come about?
We've just known him over the years. Is between the two of us, we had a good sense of divide and conquer, who had a better relationship with who, and we just went about it. They know based on who we are that it was a legitimate thing. This wasn't like some thing that was just going to be, oh, we just want to hang out with you for 2 hours. They knew it wasn't something like that. They knew when we went there, it was a legitimate thing. They understood, most importantly, that this is for their legacy, that this is, no one's done this before, and no one may never do it again, ever do it again. And if they were going to go and do something like this, or participate rather with it, it would be for the expressed way to get their story out there and have it told the right way, which is something that wasn't lost on us as we did this, as we went through it. There were so many different zigs and zags along the journey here to reach this final destination that was worth it. And there were only a few no's. I won't name the no's, but they know who they are. And it was, you can count them literally on one hand. And everyone was so great and so respectful and so generous with their time to allow us to be able to craft this story the way that we felt it should have been told.
I think it was also some persistence on our part for sure to make sure that, you know, even people who knew that they were interested, that we actually got them to talk, and like you know, sat them down and did, you know, the interviews, and it went, you know, it was like in some cases like sort of a, a fun treasure hunt to go and find, you know, somebody obscure that hadn't been talked to in a long time, you know, someone like Eddie from Eddie and the Subtitles, and like,
Mm.
you know, no one had really seen or heard from him. There, we got questions from other people who were like, "How'd you find him?" or whatever, and like, you know, and I think Dan, you know, tracked him down.
Hmm.
But I think, you know, the just getting people down and like talking to them about what was going on, and that led to like, oh, you should talk to this person, you should talk to this person, and like it led to another layer of contacts that we didn't really have. And so, and a lot of those yeah, were just really excited to talk to us, and they were like, oh, I can't believe you are doing this, you know.
And a byproduct of that also is that along the way, we lost some of the people who we spoke with. So this is basically their last interview they did in some cases. And there were some people who we lost along the way that we didn't get to, which bummed us out. But that's why the urgency to get this done was what it was, because especially with one band called The Mechanics, the singer died last week. So we got to him, we got his story last year, I want to say, and he was the band that the Agnews, Mike Ness all cite as the basically the Robert Johnson of the punk movement in Orange County, was the Mechanics. And they're not very well known. I don't even know if they have you can't find them on Spotify or anything. They're impossible to find, but they existed, and this is the way to tell the world how important they were in setting the foundation for what was to come.
Well, hopefully we could find the Mechanics at like Headline Records or something, which has
They
been
didn't. I don't think they recorded anything. Like, I think they have a few demos. If you go to the Florida Museum, there's like a mechanics like jumpsuit that they wore at one of their shows, but that's really it.
Yeah, it was a tough, yeah. I mean, even part of what we did was we actually went to Cleveland to do a big, you know, kind of archive dig at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame with like a lot of the old flip sides and Maximum Rock and Roll zines. And we actually found like I think maybe like one or two clips of with the Mechanics, like stories that, you know, again, you're not going to find it. There's no way to find them unless you actually have like, you know, the issue in front of you. And I think that part was cool too, because it was just the whole thing was just sort of like a you know, sort of a combined effort of talking to people, looking up old stuff, old archival things, and a little bit of investigative, like connecting the dots on some things that people in the scene either didn't know or that were wrong, you know, kind of like misinformation passed down. Yeah, or just were big question marks. And then one of the things, even just how Dennis Donnell actually passed away, and like what actually killed him. And I think a lot of people assumed that it was one thing for years and it had been written a certain way in news reports and press releases, but it was actually something different. We actually got that story from his widow about how he actually died. It's in the book, and that's the sort of thing that you can't really put a price on that when it comes to actually putting it down in in a book like this. So hopefully those kind of things will like stand the test of time, and people will refer back to them as like the way things really happened.
I think so. In the same way that what makes this book so great and unique is that it's the way that the stories are told that makes it so interesting. For anyone that said no in being part of the book, I think that in a couple months or whenever they are going to definitely regret it.
Yeah,
um,
They know who
sure.
they are.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess one last thing would interest someone in reading this book.
Honestly, not I could speak this from not being from the area. It's an underdog story for everyone who's ever felt like you've been overlooked, overseen, and you have a chip on your shoulder because of that. It's sounds from the suburbs. It's not from the city. It's not the cool hip thing from the city. It's a story of determination and persistence and fighting and and belief in yourself, which is a universal theme that's captured in most of these songs, is that belief, whether it's explicitly or implicitly. And that's what we hope people focus on, is knowing, the stories are fun. There's a lot of bluster, there's a lot of chaos, there's a lot of mayhem, but at this the root of it, this is an underdog story where, against the odds, against an area that didn't want them there, not only did they succeed, they changed the way music was and culture was consumed.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the stories of the ingenuity of some of these artists, that were maybe kind of labeled as like slackers or like burnouts. Um, I think to look back and see some of the genius that they had, both on the music side and when it came to furthering their careers. It was really important that they had a head on their shoulders at some point, or else they didn't survive, or else they didn't get further along in this book. So you see that like the ones that kind of like travel the furthest in this book from beginning to end. I mean, there are different groups in there, but the ones that last more than a couple of years generally had some sort of pivotal moment or pivotal point of like realization of like this is what we need to do. And I think that's part of what I read these books for myself, is like when I read like a biography of, some rock star or some talented person, like what was it that they had to struggle against and how did they get out? How did they get around it? How did they figure out a way to keep it going? And I think that exists here, and this is the local version of someone who grew up in Orange County. This is like, I think also gives me inspiration when I look back at it, and when I just read it again, I'm like, oh wow, I can't. I mean, even though I was part of this whole thing with Dan, like just to go back and actually read it again and be like, oh damn, like that's how he did that, is to me a great gift that you can give someone who you don't even know, and somebody who's going to read the book and hopefully get something out of it that they need. And that's what punk rock was for me. It was like it was different things at different times that I needed. um and it still continues to be to this day, so hopefully the book is part of that for somebody.
I think it will be. It's great, and I'm super excited for its official release.
You could
Oh,
find our book social is at OC Punk Book. Very easy. That's on Instagram. We haven't made it far enough to do anything else.
Yeah, OC Punk Book is where we're at. Please, it's wherever you buy books, check it out. And yeah, we're gonna be just kind of out and about doing events to promote this thing. I don't know where this is based or when it's coming out, but we'll be at the Fullerton Museum tomorrow for a launch for the book to celebrate it coming out. On the
With Noodles from the Offspring too.
with
He'll be
Noodles will be there. Yeah, he'll be there he'll be like a guest speaker with us. We'll be in Long Beach at Fingerprints record store, you know, talking about the book as well with another author, Jim Ruland, who wrote a book on SST records. And then we've got, you know, a slew of things we're doing up in Vegas for punk rock bowling. You know,
including at the Punk Rock Museum also.
yeah.
Doing a sit down there on the Social Distortion couch, no less.
What day is that, Dan? That was the 20th.
Sunday, that's the 25th.
The 25th, and then we come back to LA to do another great panel at the Grammy Museum, which again, who would have ever thought, like a bunch of like punk rock stories just being talked about at the Grammy Museum. But that's cool, and that's going to be on the 28th of May with Adrian Young from No Doubt, who spoke to us at length in the book, and so did Joe Escalante, who's going to be there. He's from the Vandals, currently manager of Sublime as well. And then manager Jim Guerinot, who managed half the band in the book. he's kind of the guy, business-wise, that really kind of helped make it happen towards like the middle.
The adult in the room.
Yeah, and you needed those, you know, you needed somebody who was gonna be like, who's gonna, you know, tell you like it was when you were messing up, or telling you, hey, we need to do this, you know, and it worked out for the bands that listened. So that'll be a fun one. And like I said, this whole summer we're looking forward to sort of.
In Reno, we have Reno on the 30th with Bud from Sublime also.
Oh, right. Yes.
Which will be fun.
May 30th.
Much different vibe to that one.
Yeah, Shay's Tavern. We're going to be hanging out with Bud Gaw, that's one of his local spots up there in Reno, and it seemed like a fun thing for us to be able to do for fans. But yeah, just all summer long, I'm going to be spreading the gospel of OC Punk. So, you know, look out for us.
Well, I'm super excited for you guys to be releasing this tomorrow, and I think everyone's going to be super excited and stoked. So, everyone.
Well, thanks for taking the time to speak with us. We appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Thank you guys so much for taking the time.
Right on. Thanks, Bernadette. We appreciate you.
Yeah.
Thanks. Well, have a good day.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Thanks. Have a good night, guys.